We're going to go ahead and get started with the last panel of the day before the book launch this evening. I need my program cheat sheet. I inadvertently put something incorrect on the program for this session. Questioning the definition of Louisiana women, we have 3 speakers this afternoon. Joe Davis McElligott from the UL Lafayette Department of English will be speaking, in addition to 2 graduate students also from the Department of English, Haley Fedor and AJ Jambakar. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Joe to get started. Thank you.
We had so much time, I figured, an hour and a half, I figured that I would go ahead and speak as well. So my role here is also as moderator. I wanted to take some time to contextualize for you the context of the panel, which is centered on taking a moment to think about how we define ourselves as women and to begin a dialogue about the various ways in which we inhabit our womanhoods in Louisiana. I am a Louisiana transplant, but I think by this point, it would be fair to say that if I have not yet fully become a Louisiana woman, I am in the process of becoming one. Over the course of the 5 years I've lived here, I find myself continually impressed, engaged, and fascinated by the people, the culture, and the ecology. Can you hear me okay? No, okay. It's too loud? Oh, yeah, it's a little bit loud. That's fine. Okay, where was I? I find myself continually impressed, engaged, and fascinated by the people, the culture, and the ecology. My child, who both lost a tooth and turned 5 yesterday, a big day in both his and our world, was born in Louisiana, and now attends an elementary school in the town of Opelousas, where we moved 3 years ago to get away from the hustle and bustle of Lafayette. I want to take a moment to share with you the story of my grandmothers, neither of whom lived in Louisiana, but they were both Southerners for a time anyway. I hope that my sharing this personal narrative will help us think through some of the aspects of the ways in which women experience their womanness differently from one another, and in doing so come to a clearer and more coherent understanding of what experiences they do share. And our questioning the definition of what it means to be a Louisiana woman, and the various ways in which we live our lives, I think we stand to gain more than we'll lose. My father's mother, Mary Alice, was a Black woman, born and raised in a small town outside of Starkville, Mississippi, to poor sharecroppers. She was the descendant of slaves who, so far as we have been able to discover, worked the land not far from where she was born. Mary dropped out of school in the 8th grade to help her family work, to manage her younger siblings. Any more education would, at that time, have been an indulgence the family couldn't afford. No one knows how she met my grandfather, Theodore Roosevelt Davis. She was notoriously tight-lipped about what she called personal business. But we do know that, along with many other African Americans during the Great Migration, the 2 of them moved north to the burgeoning metropolis of Wichita, Kansas. She worked as a seamstress out of her home at first, as she tended to their 9 children, until my grandfather passed away when my father was 10. My grandfather served in World War II, but the GI Bill didn't do him any good. He got a job at a factory, but the union would not accept him as a member. So he started a landscaping business. My father remembers his father working 9-hour days in the factory and then working until dark in the lawns of white families in neighborhoods that would never sell a home to him. He passed away of a heart attack at the age of 50 when my father was 10. But before he died, he made my grandmother promise him that she would not go on the dole or lose the house. Mary made good on that promise, as perhaps insane and unfair as it was. She went to work in the factory as a seamstress full-time and did the best she could. My father tells me that he remembers the feeling of being hungry, hunger gnawing at his insides, twisting and turning more than any other physical sensation from his childhood. Yet somehow, inexplicably to me as a mother myself, she raised those 9 children into adulthood. Every one of them graduated from high school. My sweet grandma Mary died suddenly one Christmas over 10 years ago of heart failure at the too early age of 76. Of her 9 gorgeous children, only 3 survive, the others taken too soon by diseases common to African Americans with no money and no or spotty health coverage. Liver disease, pancreatic cancer gone too long undiagnosed, heart disease, and diabetes-related illnesses. My father escaped the ghetto somehow. Over the length of my childhood and early adulthood, my father worked his way through his bachelor's degree and a master's of divinity at Wheaton College. and a PhD in religion from the University of Iowa, where I, 10 years after he completed his degree, would be awarded mine from the same institution. The Reverend Dr. Don Davis, as he claims to be called, is an impressive title, to me at least. He's the vice president of a nonprofit missionary organization. He lives 5 miles from his childhood home in the inner city. My aunties Linda Jo and Norma Jean live in the house my grandmother and grandfather bought years ago. The neighborhood is deteriorated in some ways. There's rampant gang activity and drive-by shootings and poverty. It is a food desert, but it is home. My mother's mother, Kathleen Nedra, a white woman, was raised by an upper-middle-class family by well-educated parents. After her mother divorced her father, she moved with Kathleen to Starkville, Mississippi, which is a weird coincidence, where she lived until her teenage years when the family relocated to Hutchinson, Kansas, some 45 minutes away from Wichita, where my father was living. Immediately after high school, she attended college, where she majored in English education and became a school teacher. She married my grandfather, Samuel Franklin Root, who was a carpenter and had a strong business. She had 2 daughters, and while raising them into early childhood, earned an MA degree in English at night. 7 years later, she gave birth to my mother, and 4 years after that, my uncle. She gradually became satisfied with the pay and position as a school teacher, and when my uncle went to school, made the decision to go back to earn another MA in education so she could have more say-so. Though she was a fantastic homemaker, a baker of bread, a cultivator of an elaborate English garden, the sort of woman who would embroider pillowcases and crochet tablecloths just because, my mother was required to pick up some of the slack, walking home after school every day to clean up my grandfather's lunch dishes and get dinner started. Because of the academic calendar and some moderate flexibility in my father and grandfather's work, my grandparents took my mother and her brother, her much older sisters were long gone out of the home, on trips around the U.S., in their camper, where they would visit national parks and hike. My grandparents paid for my mother to attend college, bought her a car, and gave her money for expenses. My mother met my father when she was in college, and there, shortly before graduation, they eloped without telling my grandma. Very, very mean. And I don't know what I'd do to my child if he did that. With no children in the home, my grandma Ruth began to teach courses for extra pay at the local community college, and she and my grandfather began to travel the world. My grandfather built a darkroom in their basement where he would develop pictures they'd taken on their trips or of their various grandchildren. In their retirement, they were avid readers, bird watchers, and lovers of classical music. My grandfather had a stroke and lived the remainder of his days in a lovely nursing home surrounded by his favorite art and music until he passed away at the age of 93. My grandmother continued to travel without him until she suffered a devastating stroke at the age of 89. She lived in a beautiful room in the same lovely nursing home where my grandfather had lived until passing away late last year at the age of 102.
Wow.
I've often thought about what it means that these 2 women could have been living so close to one another in Mississippi. I can imagine my grandmother Kathleen, smart in a nice new dress, carrying her books after school to nab a pastry from her stepfather's bakery in the heart of Starkville before returning home to do her homework. I think of my grandma Mary, some 30 miles away, working in the field perhaps, or watching her younger siblings, learning to make nothing much stretch further than it should, her formal years of education long since over. Separated by class, by race, by space, by advantage, by history, I think often of the 2 of them so close to one another in the Jim Crow South, yet worlds apart. I wonder sometimes what it would mean to travel back in time, to get them together in the same room, somehow, some way, and to look at them in the eyes, both of them young mothers, and to say to them with my child, I am your granddaughter. I am your legacies brought together in this way. I recognize that I come from socioeconomic privilege on my mother's side. My grandmother was able to buy me books, encouraged me to read for leisure at an early age, was always available to travel to see us. Kathleen would bring back exotic and often fantastical gifts from Thailand or Peru or Denmark. When she realized that she was getting older, she gave me her jewelry, which I have never appraised, but she told me it was valuable. Her home is full of exotic ephemera from all around the world, full of books and newspapers, and an all-white neighborhood. I was deeply loved and nurtured by her. Though my grandma Mary was poor her whole life, she was kind, gentle, and generous, well known for giving out a single dollar bill to everyone for their birthdays, for everything. One. On my graduation, My Grandma Mary gave me a $10 bill. I kept it, a sign of my privilege and a reminder of her sacrifice for me. While holding her hands, which were remarkably smooth and soft and adept at threading needles and braiding her hair, I learned that Black people could survive things they were not meant to survive, things that were maybe impossible to survive. That was my legacy too. We live in a binary world, man and woman, black and white, but I've always thought of myself as a whole person. In order to make sense of myself, I've often wondered what sorts of things my grandmothers had in common, what forces perhaps might have been working against them, or what difficulties they might have faced in kind. Are there any ties that bind them together? Am I really the only connection between them? In order to determine what they might have in common, I came to realize that I might begin with what kept them apart: their class, their race, their levels of education, their upbringings, their very different expressions of faith, one rooted in the Black church with its day-long services and potlucks, the other in what seemed to me a somewhat cold Presbyterianism that required too much somber talking. What would happen if I stopped thinking of difference as inherently problematic, but instead began to embrace difference, work through difference, respect difference? Women are not a block that can be easily summed up. We are many, varied, vast, strange, beautiful. Difference then matters. In my own work, I embrace the theory and technology of intersectionality as a way to understand through difference the ways in which we might connect, the ways in which we are similar, and to think through forces that act on us in disparate ways. Intersectionality is an unwieldy and complicated word, so let me break it down into more digestible pieces. Generally speaking, intersectional theory is a study of overlapping and intersecting social identities, women, let's say, or lesbian, or Latina, and the ways in which these social identities are impacted by related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination, let's say race and class, or ability and age. Intersectional theory makes the case that biological, social, and cultural categories, such as gender, race, class, ability, sexual orientation, religion, caste, age, nationality, let's say citizenship status, interact on multiple and often simultaneous levels. Let me give you an example. My Grandma Mary and my Grandma Catherine were both Southern. They both identified as women. They were both raised to be homemakers and mothers. They both learned domestic skills in addition to learning how to read and write. But Mary was Black, which in the Jim Crow South meant she was of a lower caste than my Grandma Kathleen. Mary was terribly poor and was, as a result, forced to leave school. Because Kathleen was well off, she was educated. Given the history of slavery, Mary's father could not own property. Kathleen's ancestors, German immigrants, were free to homestead and make a go of it, to fully participate in American life. Even though she was familiar with it, Kathleen didn't care for Southern cuisine. Her mother was not Southern, but Midwestern, so she would cook for us meals of pot roast and mashed potatoes, or German cuisine such as bratwurst, Pfeffernussen, Spätzle, and German potato salad, which is gross. Yeah. It's not as good. Grandma Mary, on the other hand, would cook soul food. Greens, chitlins, which I've never once eaten. Beans with ham hocks, cornbread stuffing, and Southern potato salad, which is the real one. Intersectional frameworks are especially useful in understanding how systemic injustice and social inequality work multidimensionally. For example, if you are a poor Black woman with a chronic disability, the ways in which you experience your womanhood in Louisiana will be vastly different than me. I am middle class and able-bodied. Yet again, a wealthy white woman who is queer is vulnerable to being fired because of her sexuality, but I, a woman married to a man and presumed to be heterosexual, am not. Intersectional approaches to human identity, indeed to the lives of women, helps us to understand the importance of articulating and appreciating the differences between us as we work toward a common ground. I can say, for example, that both of my grandparents received less pay than their male counterparts, though Grandma Mary received even less than Grandma Kathleen. Both of them are the sole homemakers. My Grandpa Root never cleaned a dish or cooked a meal, or even did much to raise my mother and her siblings, aside from serving as disciplinarian. Neither of them were able to, until a certain point, make financial decisions separate from their husbands, which hamstrung them in ways which obviously hamstrung them. Both women were of strong constitution. They weren't the sort of people you didn't pay attention to, and when they spoke, you listened. but they'd been trained from a young age to expect that their voices would mean less than a man's. Both of my grandmothers suffered under the boot heel of capitalism and patriarchy. They suffered from a lack of understanding of women's gynecological issues during childbirth. Even if I were to articulate the even finer points of the differences between them, in my mind those differences only serve to paint a more compelling and complete picture of the ways in which they lived their lives as women. Sometimes modes of oppression intersect for women. In Louisiana, I am happy to report, it is the law that women can breastfeed their children anywhere and everywhere in public, and it is not a violation of obscenity. One of the few states. I mean, that is, can you believe that? Like, I cannot believe it. What was that?
It's good to be number one at something.
Yeah. I mean, but in other backwards places, women, black or white, might find themselves being told to cover up. In creating a full and complete and honest picture of the ways in which we as women exist in our spaces as women, both together and separately, we create a fuller and more complete picture of the ways in which systems of oppression bind us and force us apart. Because I'm a scholar of literature, I want to very, very briefly speak about Kate Chopin's The Awakening, a novella I admit to you today I read for the first time this past winter. I just know that
It's crazy. I've never read it.
I actually wrote, there are so many books, my friends, and only so much time.
And I've taught it so many times I don't want to teach it anymore.
Oh, okay, yeah, maybe I'll start doing it.
I read it 3 times in high school.
I had, of course, heard much about Edna Pontellier. That's how you pronounce it, correct? And it's Alcé, or Alcé? Alcé. I had, of course, heard much about Edna Pontellier, mostly that she kills herself. But no one had ever told me that she was, like me, an outsider to Louisiana. In her mind, a good, wholesome Presbyterian Kentuckian, often scandalized by the free thinking and speaking, easygoing, and happy conversations and habits of being of her husband's Creole family and friends. Of course, I knew that the novel was about Edna's rejection of the constraints of being a woman in her time, that she resisted the demands of motherhood as they were stipulated to her, bristled at the formality of dress and carriage required of women, and desperately worked by her husband, for whom she was not a good match. Edna falls in love with a young man, Robert, but that ends painfully. She has a torrid affair with Elsie, but that doesn't make much difference in how she feels for very long. She's not a particularly attentive wife nor mother, not because she does not love her children, I think she does, but because she's not able to care for them in the way she would like. Edna comes to find out that there is no escaping the constraints upon women, not by retreating into the role of goodly wife and mother, not by falling in love, not by having sex with a handsome man, or painting, or swimming, or sleeping, or anything. And so, at the end of the text, it seems, she flings herself into the sea. No one, however, told me about her Quadrant Nurse. I was struck by that description because I would have been considered a mulatto. My sweet child, whose father is white, would be marked quadroon. The word held my attention. It is perhaps not surprising that no one told me the nameless young woman who was structured as Edna's foil told me about her, a dark shadow that she resists and longs for. I imagine that the young woman, the nameless quadroon, might have entered the life as an au pair to avoid plissage, an extra-legal system that allowed wealthy men to take light-skinned women as something between a second wife and a mistress. Perhaps the nameless woman wanted to avoid becoming a hard laborer or a whore, much, much less the mistresses who were the degraded, socially indulged. Perhaps she, like Edna, is not particularly interested in marriage at all, and discovered that being an au pair might provide her with the freedom to move about without the constant demands of a husband. It is convention that demands Edna have an au pair, and anyway, the narrator tells us, she was, quote, not a mother woman, who seemed to prevail that summer at Grand Isle. It was easy to know them, fluttering about with extended, protecting wings, when any harm, real or imaginary, threatened their precious brood. They were women who idolized their children, worshipped their husbands, and esteemed it a holy privilege to efface themselves as individuals and grow wings as ministering angels. Many of them were delicious in the role. That's a passage, all right. Edna prefers to have time apart, to spend reading or flirting in the hammock with Robert or painting. Yet it is abundantly clear that Edna resents the quadroon au pair. Her demands are unreasonable. She wants the quadroon nurse to remain near her children, which is what convention demands, yet far away. As such, quote, the quadroon nurse followed them about with a faraway, meditative air. This makes some sense to me. The conventions of white womanhood would have made it impossible for Edna to tussle and tumble with the boys, to affectionately nurse them and hold them and get dirty with them. So I read it as a sign of love gone perverse that she prohibits the Quadrant Nurse from having the pleasure of mothering her children in the way she cannot. This means, sadly, that the Pontellier boys are not mothered by anyone. Quote, if one of the little Pontellier boys took a tumble whilst at play, he was not apt to rush crying to his mother's arms for comfort. He would more likely pick himself up, wipe the water out of his eyes and sand out of his mouth, and go on playing. At all times, the narrator tells us, for Edna, quote, the Quadrant Nurse was looked upon as a huge encumbrance, only good to button up waists and panties and to brush and part hair, since it seemed to be a law of society that hair must be parted and brushed. Edna is, quote, constantly grumbling at the negligence of her quadroon, and in a blaze of hypocrisy, quote, scolds her for not being more attentive. At times, the narrator informs us that Edna, quote, assists the quadroon, though it is just as often she is likely to send her away. In fact, at one point we see that, quote, the quadroon had vanished. The Quadrant Nurse is, in this instance, an unnecessary accessory, an embodied yet disembodied representation of Edna's lack of freedom. The quadroon, a human being and a young woman like herself, is Edna's mirror. In her, she sees that she is not free. Unfortunately, Edna is incapable of seeing that the Quadrant Nurse is not free either. But it would have been impossible, perhaps, for Edna to have come to that conclusion, given the caste system that made Edna white and the Quadrant Nurse a quadroon. The system of racism which elevated Edna and degraded the Quadrant Nurse erodes the ground on which they might cooperate together and resist. Yet Edna sees quite clearly that the Quadrant Nurse is beautiful, and perhaps this is also why she loathes her. For even though white Southern women were angels of their houses, they are expected to be silent while their husbands raped their servants or took mistresses. In one odd scene, we learn that Edna demands that, quote, the quadroon sit for hours before Edna's pallet, while the housemaid took charge of the children and the drawing room went undusted. But when I think of what it means for Edna to be sitting there, and for the Quadrant Nurse to be sitting there, facing one another for hours. Though the narrator slights the Quadrant of Hare's humanity, calls her a savage, but she's sitting there like a savage. It is a moment when the two of them are absconding their duties. Edna is no housewife, darning socks for her husband. She is creating something. The Quadrant Nurse is not watching the children, but is resting in a chair. Of course, the imbalance of power is evident. The Quadrant Nurse could not say no. But it is a striking scene, one that I think lends itself to a particularly acute intersectional reading of oppression. When, near the end of the summer, the children are sent away, they are sent with their quadroon. And what strikes me as a total disembodiment, this woman is no longer herself. She is a possession, an object. I wonder, as I read, what must her inner world have been like? What thoughts might the nurse have had? I was reminded of the early days when my child was too small to be left unattended, but yet too small to fully engage with me. But even then, after he was placed in his co-sleeper for the night, I had my husband, I had my books, I had my work, I had my friends. The Quadrant Nurse, I realized, had no one. It strikes me that in this text that many have argued is prototypically feminist, that there are so few readings of the Quadrant Nurse, that the focus seems to be on the liberation of Edna, but not of her double. I like to think that this literary example makes plain the usefulness of intersectionality, for making sense of the ways in which the forces of race, class, and patriarchy both entrap and ensnare Edna and her Quadrant Nurse in different yet intersecting ways. So that's my speech. I'm going to introduce AJ and then Haley, and then should I introduce you both at the same time?
Sure, go for it.
Thank you. These heels are for real. Okay. I would like now to turn this over to AJ Jabakhtar, who is a second-year PhD in English, concentrating in early modern literary studies, mainly in the works of John Milton. She is from the small town of Laplace. Wait, Laplace?
Laplace.
Okay.
You gotta live
Wait, say that again.
a little bit.
Laplace.
Like, like Laplace?
No, Laplace.
Okay.
With this,
Okay,
yeah.
Laplace. Louisiana, and received her undergraduate degree in English and Women's Studies, summa cum laude, from the University of Massachusetts. She received her MA in English from Northwestern State University. AJ is also an aspiring screenwriter, having written 14 scripts, most of them modern adaptations of Shakespearean plays. She was nominated for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Nicholl Fellowship in Screenwriting and the American Zoetrope Award for her original LGBTQ screenplay, Romance in D. She was represented by an agent and manager in Los Angeles and would like to sell her scripts in hopes of paying off her student loans someday. The titles of the two pieces she will be reading today are A Life Without Limits, Growing Up Hindu and Homosexual, and Same-Sex Domestic Violence, It Happens a Lot. Both are real-life autobiographical pieces that she wrote for the nonprofit organization Just Do Something, Anything. And this is Haley Fedor. Did I pronounce her last name?
No.
Fedor?
Fedor.
Fedor? Wow.
Like feed, five, fo, fum?
Okay.
Yeah.
Haley Fedor. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Haley Fedor received her BA in English and French from Bethany College and her MA from Marshall University. She was a Fulbright Scholarship recipient and a 2014 Pushcart Prize nominee. Her scholarly interests include British modernism and postmodernism, queer authors and LGBT literature, and intersectional feminism and popular culture. Her short stories and essays have appeared or are forthcoming in The Echo, Section 8 magazine, Literary Orphans, Guide to Culture magazine, Crab Bat Literary magazine, and the anthology Dispatches from Lesbian America. The title of her piece is Short Hair Don't Care, Unpushed Lesbian Identity.
Hello, everyone. As Joe was saying, the first piece that I'll be reading, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The first piece I'll be reading is A Life Without Limits, Growing Up Hindu and Homosexual. And if I get a little emotional, please bear with me. Sometimes I have dreams about my future wedding day. I hold hands with my Indian husband, an engineer maybe, or a doctor, as we circle the ceremonial fire in traditional Indian garb, flanked by gold jewelry and extravagant ornaments. We are filled with the certainty that we will be bound together in harmony for life, and everything is perfect, just the way it's supposed to be. There's only one problem. I'm not straight. But it took me a long time to realize that that's not a problem. I grew up in a small town 40 miles west of New Orleans, the younger of two daughters of immigrants. My parents are the most self-sacrificing people I know. My dad was raised in a tiny village in India with no electricity or running water, oftentimes studying by candlelight during his childhood and eating nothing but a boiled egg a day. In contrast, I was raised in America with things that far surpassed mere necessities. Although I felt grateful for these luxuries, along with that gratitude came an equally strong sense of guilt over being spoiled. The combination of that gratitude and guilt sparked a self-imposed pressure to succeed and to live up to the ideals of the culture. Being born into a family of devout Hindus, I frequently visited the local temple as a child. I recall sitting on the hard linoleum floor amongst a throng of worshipers, surrounded by statues, idols adorned with silk and flowers and grains of rice. I was obedient and quiet as chants were muttered in tongues I did not understand, to which I could not connect emotionally. I found myself detached from my religion, from spirituality altogether. Such was the case for many years. I started noticing girls shortly after my 16th birthday. During the summer before my junior year, I attended a club conference in Texas with a group of young women from several Louisiana parishes. On the bus ride there, I chatted with a girl who, I kid you not, was the spitting image of Alicia Silverstone from Clueless.
For real.
I recall sitting alone with Miss Silverstone at a table in Planet Hollywood in downtown Dallas 2 days later as she complained for 3.5 hours about her boyfriend's indiscretions. As she spoke, all I could think about was how magnificent she was, how pleasant her voice sounded, her warm and endearing personality, the insanity of the boyfriend, and how odd it felt to be overcome with extreme nervousness. It was the kind of anxiety that is blissful, surreal, and simultaneously shocks the core. Basically, these were butterflies that only a crush can bring. I never saw her again, but I'll never forget her. From that point on until the age of 18, I experienced the most agonizing torment I've ever gone through in my life, the questioning period. I was plagued by incessant thoughts about the true nature of my sanity, second-guessing whether my emotions were part of the reality I had always known or whether they were part of some alternate universe where delusions were actually reality. I chastised and berated myself constantly. It was my own version of self-imposed electroshock therapy. My feelings towards my inclinations and urges went beyond guilt to a dark place of shame about who I was and what I feared I would become. A second-class citizen and family member, an ostracized Hindu, a spiritual failure. This daily self-lashing lasted 2 years. When I turned 18, I decided to come out to my parents, and I chose the morning of December 25th to do it. I didn't select it for shock value, though. Christmas, although a Christian holiday, was always celebrated in our household as our favorite day of the year, a time when the familial bond that we always valued became something that was renewed and strengthened time and time again. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, post-wrapping paper cleanup, post-dishwasher loading, and pre-trying to figure out how these words were going to somehow magically form themselves into sentences that I could verbalize. But sometimes, anxiety prompts a person to act on impulse before the mind can object and the body can resist. I blurted out the 3 words, not even stuttering on the L word, and all I remember thereafter was the unsurprised look on my mother's face as she said, "It's just a phase." And suddenly I felt like a kid who had woken up on Christmas morning with all the anticipation and hope in the world. Sorry. Only to find out that the one thing she had wished for that year wasn't under the tree. I was that kid and I was crushed. From that moment onwards, I experienced an emotional distancing from my family that filled me with some of the greatest emptiness that I have ever known. It was like trekking through a tundra, surrounded by nomads, but blindfolded and feeling like no one was there. I tried to wash away that emptiness with a series of failed relationships. I didn't want to face rejection, abandonment, and judgment by the people whom I had always considered to be the closest to me, by the spiritual being out there. Out of desperation, I went to a temple in Houston one weekend, about 15 years after I had last been inside of a religious establishment. People oftentimes describe spiritual experiences as monumental, dramatic events that are blissful, surreal, and simultaneously shock the core. Mine was ordinary, I suppose, but in crossing that threshold, I felt a transformation, one from a lifetime of feeling displacement to just one moment of feeling balance, peace, and belonging. That's when I realized that this puzzle of life is only complete when the last piece of it stops struggling. When I accept that the puzzle maker truly wants me to stop fighting the puzzle itself and just be, only then can I accept myself as the piece that fits. Today I am grateful that I am that piece, that I have the capacity to enact change in this world based on who I am, based on just being me. And since I've come to that place of self-acceptance, of self-nurturing, I have been blessed with the ability to embrace that puzzle instead of shunning it, to feel compassion for the other pieces and to love myself regardless of whether they are an acceptance of me or even of themselves. My family doesn't exactly welcome my homosexuality today, but they don't reject it either. They love me for just being, and I love them in the same way. I thank that spiritual someone, that threshold in Houston, for giving me the power to truly know that. So these days, I still sometimes have dreams about my future wedding day. I hold hands with my wife as we circle the ceremonial fire in traditional Indian garb, flanked by gold jewelry and extravagant ornaments. We are filled with the certainty that we will be bound together in harmony for life, but everything isn't perfect. Instead, it's just the way it's supposed to be. This is my second piece through which I'll probably cry even more. I hope you're okay with that. This is entitled Same-Sex Domestic Violence. It happens a lot. Thank you. I love you. The Los Angeles heat is excruciating during the summer. The undersized, overpriced studio apartment where I was living was part of a shoddy complex in a dangerous part of North Hollywood. But the key perk of this place was the reliable air conditioning. Thank you so much. I'll need the whole box. But the key perk of this place was the reliable air conditioning. So instead of spending my summer days at the Chinese theater, as a lot of young people were prone to doing, I chose comfortable ghetto isolation. When a 20-something becomes a summer hermit, there's only so much she can do. TV, check. Video games, check. Computer. I met her in a chat room on an online dating site for single lesbians. Her profile seemed pretty enticing. 32 years old, originally from Argentina, long blondish brown hair, green eyes, very athletic, college graduate, loves to party. And her picture screamed cuteness. I was feeling particularly bold and invincible as many 20-something women do, so I decided to meet her. Loves to party apparently meant loves to party. Our first date consisted of getting high and having sex. I distinctly remember not wanting to sleep with her that soon, but at the same time, feeling a deep loneliness because I hadn't dated in a while. So I was submissive, and I stayed submissive throughout the entire course of what would be a 2-year relationship of the worst kind. The initial dating period went fairly well. We would occasionally go out to dinner, to the movies, and engage in other activities that people in the early romantic stages do. She held doors open for me and even bought me kiddie meals at fast food places because I liked the cheap toys inside, and I still do. I thought these little incentives would serve as fond memories later on in our relationship. They didn't. Instead, these nice tidbits somehow faded into oblivion, and nothing but hopelessness and pain took their place. I clearly recall the first time she hit me. It happened about a month into our relationship. Sorry. I was hanging out with my friend Mark at his house. She called my cell, politely asking when I would be home, because she was coming from her sister's place in Woodland Hills to visit me. I told her I would be at my apartment within the next 2 hours, tops, but not to arrive sooner than that, lest she got there before I did. About 30 minutes later, I got another call saying that she was waiting in her van outside my apartment complex. Honestly, my automatic response was fear. Not fear of what I now know were the unreasonable demands of an unstable woman, but fear of disappointing the person whom I thought was the solution to my inherent loneliness. So I asked Mark to rush me back. He dropped me off next to her van and I climbed in. She was angry and disappointed. Strangely enough, I found myself excusing her anger just so I could appease her disappointment. I think that's the moment I was reeled in and hooked. I invited her back to my apartment. She locked the door behind us, and in what seemed like one swift motion, slammed my head sideways against the thin brown carpet, my right ear to the ground. I remember the taste of that carpet, woolly, gritty, and coarse, and I remember feeling stunned, not just emotionally, but physically. The physical shock, it seemed, at the time trumped the emotional response. I vaguely recall her spitting out paranoid accusations about me sleeping with Mark. I was too scared to object, then and always thereafter. The next 2 years were filled with constant drug use and an endless barrage of physical assaults. There was a blur of never-ending slapping, kicking, choking, breaking, destroying me from the outside in. I was dragged by my hair into her van to visit her family for Thanksgiving dinner, even though I had a 103-degree fever. I was punched directly in the nose one time, forcing it to bleed onto the white linen of our bed. In explanation, she told the doctor that I had tried to burn her with a cigarette, and she had kicked me in self-defense. I didn't object. Unfortunately, neither did the doctor. She once chased me around my entire apartment complex in the middle of the afternoon, accusing me of doing the last of the drugs. I knocked on every door in desperation. Everyone was somewhere else. She finally found the drugs in her own pocket. I really think she would have killed me right then and there if she hadn't. My parents were gravely worried. They bought last-minute tickets to Los Angeles to visit us with the intention of taking me home with them to Louisiana. But I wouldn't go. Despite everything, I wanted to stay. At first, I thought that the loneliness was greater than any physical pain that she could ever inflict. But soon enough, through something I can only describe as the love of that higher power, I realized that the pain of living the way I was living had become greater than my fear of that loneliness. It was only then that I could seek treatment. I made a decision to get on that plane, and I never went back. A few months ago, she sent me a friend request on Facebook. I took a deep breath when I saw it, and I clicked the Not Now button. I'm worth more than that today. I don't need to numb myself at the hands of another person, even at the hands of myself. I can find self-esteem without being controlled or manipulated, without being abused and coerced. I have an identity apart from that loneliness these days. So not now is so fitting, not today, and not ever again. Thank you.
Show them your engagement ring, damn it.
Oh, yes. I'm engaged. I just got engaged February 3rd. Not to that woman, by the way.
Jesus, man. I love you, AJ. You're the best. And that's, damn it, that's a really tough act to follow. Really? Just setting me up here. My piece is called Short Hair Don't Care on Butch Lesbian Identity. And in case y'all aren't really that familiar, butch is a term used to describe a lesbian, well, usually lesbian, with a masculine gender identity or adopts masculine gender characteristics. But today, in this moment, I identify as a butch lesbian. I haven't always identified that way,
but it also took me a very long time to understand what butch meant, what lesbian meant. Just took me a long time. I was raised in a fairly strict Irish Catholic household in the suburbs of southwestern Pennsylvania. We went to church every Sunday, had frequent get-togethers with extended family, and didn't know any openly queer people. I had to wear dresses to church every week, and I hated it. I felt like a sack of potatoes, only the sack had a hole at the bottom. The dresses were uncomfortable, the stockings itchy, and I hated having to cross my legs like a lady. I was immensely jealous of my younger brother who got to wear slacks and shoes without a heel. And he got to play his Game Boy. Unfair. When I was around 14, I started noticing other girls. At church Bible study, at the mall, at camp in the summer. I distinctly knew that these feelings were different from how I viewed other girls, but I also knew that I would have to get married to a man someday and be a good Catholic girl around boys until then. I was perfectly content to just stay friends with guys at school or in the neighborhood, but I didn't realize how easy it was to be chased when I wasn't attracted to them. Before my sophomore year, I went to the doctor for my yearly physical. There was a moment when she asked if I had any questions or things I wanted to know, and I told her I felt like I should have been born a boy. The room got quiet, and immediately I knew I had said something wrong to her. I'll never forget the look on her face when she said, "I'm going to stop you there. You don't want to go down that road." And she patted my shoulder politely before walking out of the room. I was crushed, to say the least. And around that time, we started visiting my grandmother's church, and the priest there was more of a fire and brimstone type than usual. He frequently had sermons discussing the dangers of improper behavior and the necessity for both vigilance and confession. On topics like betrothal and marriage, this priest decreed that couples who cohabitated for 6 months or longer before marriage were doomed to hell. He also frequently discussed the dangerous homosexuals that lurked outside the church doors. I had no idea what homosexuals were, but I certainly didn't want to be one if it cost me my immortal soul. I was so confused about what I wanted and what my feelings meant. This was a really dark time for me, and I listened to nothing but hard rock and metal music, kind of emo phase, agonizing over what my family assumed were normal teenager concerns. I couldn't ask anyone in my family, and all of the professional adults I knew, my doctor, my priest, were telling me I should feel terrible for these thoughts and feelings. I used the school computer, never at home, to research everything I could about lesbians and what it meant to be gay. Immediately, I recognized my feelings reflected in what I read. Knowing I wasn't the only person to feel this way was a moment of huge relief. When I bought my first laptop, I discovered queer films like But I'm a Cheerleader and Hedwig and the Angry Inch streaming. In college, I joined the Gay Straight Alliance and came out to my friends. I had queer friends and mentors who shared similar experiences and their own wisdom. There weren't many other butch women on campus, but I felt free to explore that part of my identity. I participated in drag shows on campus, and I only wore clothes that I wanted, not the ones I was expected to wear. I wore ties and button-up shirts, and it felt right. I didn't experience the weird, exposed feeling I got when wearing skirts and dresses. Even hearing the word butch became a freeing experience in college compared to a negative one. Before, anytime I had heard a woman being described as butch, it was an incredibly negative thing. It meant nasty, unfeminine, dirty, aggressive, loudmouth, and domineering. In college, that definition completely changed, and my baby butch self wasn't afraid to identify that way. But I started to notice that when expected to do presentations in my classes, I got points taken off for my appearance. Professors said I wasn't dressing professionally enough, which was code for feminine. Granted, I had a love affair with pairs of black jeans that year, and it was difficult to get me to wear anything else. But when I wore slacks, men's dress shoes, a button-up, I still got points docked off. I received comments on my appearance, that my hair was too short, that I looked tired. Tired was also code for no makeup. I've always hated makeup. I still remember being 18 and having my mother follow me around the house, trying to do my makeup for me before church or a party. After minutes spent on wheedling, I would let her. I started wearing makeup just to stop hearing her, just to stop hearing all of those comments. It's an automatic process for me now, and I hate the necessity of it. When I started teaching as a master's student, I was told by my first-year writing director that I didn't dress professionally enough, the same old line, that I needed to distinguish myself as a professional and not dress like my students. I needed to wear skirts and dresses and makeup. To this day, I have not forgiven this director, a female professional who should have understood the pressures on women in academia, not reinforced them. Despite my anger, I did what she said. I rebelled in little ways, like wearing a mohawk or shaving my head. I taught gender issues in my composition classroom, and I was out to my students. They had lots of questions. It was awesome. I wore a dress, but I knew, and my director knew, that I was a dyke in a dress. I made no attempt to hide it. I didn't want to be forced into a professional closet because this was 2012. Granted, I was living in West Virginia, which isn't known for being accepting of others, particularly others with a capital O. But I had expected academics to be the most open and accepting people around. Some were, but many were not. I was told I talked too much about being a lesbian by peers in some faculty. How could I not talk about part of my identity which had taken so long for me to finally accept and understand? I realized that these people were not worth my time, but it took a long, long time to reach that realization. My identity as a butch lesbian is important to me. Butch women are pariahs of the LGBTQIA+ community. They're the first stereotyped image someone thinks of when they hear the word lesbian. Masculine clothing, no makeup, short hair, nose piercings and tattoos. Hates men and is forever seducing straight women. Is good at fixing and building things. Drives a motorcycle. I'm often told I look like a lesbian. Not all lesbians are butch women. Some are femme or like feminine clothing. Some like both. Femme is also a code word for can be mistaken for a straight woman. Can pass. If you're a butch woman, everyone assumes that you're a lesbian. That's not always the case. We're taught that lesbians can be spotted a mile away wearing Doc Martens and flannel. Attributing these superficial physical characteristics to a lesbian identity is not only incorrect, but it can be harmful to lesbians who don't fit in, who feel invisible. Sometimes it's nice when I don't have to say anything, to come out as a lesbian all over again to people I've just met because they see I'm butch and just assume. I like not having to come out as a lesbian every minute of every day. In a world where everyone is straight until proven gay, my butch appearance is apparently proof enough for a lot of people. But I don't dress the way I do, style my hair the way I do for the approval or disapproval of others. I do it for myself, and this is how I feel the most comfortable. I'll always remember the thrill I felt when I picked up the razor and shaved my head for the first time. The click, then buzz of the razor, feeling it hum in my hand and seeing locks of hair fall in the sink below me. It was one of the most freeing experiences I've ever had. I finally felt like my outside was reflecting who I was inside. I am occasionally confused for a man, and instead of being offended, it makes me laugh. I have been confused for a man in front of my mother before. Did not make her laugh. To this day, I wear skirts and dresses when I teach or give presentations. Not today. I'm still working on overcoming that fear that I will not be seen as a professional for wearing men's clothing. At some point, I know I just won't care, but right now, it's exhausting. I can't wait for the day when I can dress how I want and not worry how others will perceive me, even in the classroom. Thank you.
No. That's what we got. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah. I'm sorry that those young people left. They needed to hear your stories. Didn't they? Oh, you're there. Oh, good. It sounds like you all really do need to connect and mentor each other.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what we're doing. You were right.
It's a real thing. These guys are really great.
I have a question.
Mhm.
What are the pressures that you're feeling that don't allow you to wear what you want? Is your job threatened? Are you?
That kind of felt like the case when I was in my master's program for sure. There was like a very superficial, there were very superficial reasons that they elected to not allow MA students to teach. So I was worried that I wouldn't be able to teach if I didn't behave a certain way. And then when I started teaching, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to continue the next semester, just because I had students complaining, saying, oh, she's okay, but she talks about gay stuff too much. I get that a lot in evaluations, actually. And it used to terrify me a little bit, but now not as much, because evaluations are BS. So, I don't know. It's more from older faculty and staff that I'd encountered that with. Non-traditional students, older non-traditional students who didn't like being taught new things about gender when they had been raised a certain way to understand gender identity as a certain thing. I kind of had that challenge to my authority a lot. So when it was easier to pass, essentially. And if they don't assume that you're gay and you're teaching those issues, they feel that you're a little bit less invested or less personally involved, I guess. That answers your question.
AJ, we had a talk earlier about domestic violence by Margot Hasho from the sociology department. I wish she was still here because she's also a counselor and has counseled many people who were victims of domestic violence. And I don't know if or how many same-sex couples she has counseled. It'd be interesting to talk to her. And Joe, I think you need to write an article on the silent quadrant culture. I mean, that topic has been mentioned fleetingly in the Kate Chopin criticism I've read, but I've never read a fully developed essay.
There is one I found. I
Is
Googled
there?
it, yeah.
Okay.
But it's, I don't know, I mean,
Well,
there's room there.
There's a lot more to be said.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think you need to publish that.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
really beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
is.
About your family too, and I think the way it
Yeah.
connects with that, I mean, I want you to come to my writing retreat with me. It's in Woodstock, I'm gonna mention.
Ooh,
Yeah, but it's all of you really beautifully, you know, when you write I'm writing a memoir, so I understand what it is to write like, I cry when I'm writing.
Yes.
Cathartic, isn't it?
Yes, I was practicing and reading it in my apartment before, and I started tearing up, and my dog kept looking at me like, "What's wrong?"
Magnolia, my dog is Magnolia. It does the same thing, yeah. But beautiful.
Thank
Publish
you.
that. Really.
Are you both creative writing?
No, I'm early modern lit studies. Yeah.
And I'm literary studies. Yeah. What are you writing fiction now?
Yeah, I write fiction, but I have a nonfiction piece about my experience as a lesbian in Africa coming out in an anthology. I traveled around Cameroon and Nigeria for a couple of months in 2010. Actually, that was what my Fulbright scholarship was for. So,
Oh, wow, really?
I studied bilingualism in Cameroon. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you really do.
We do. We have wonderful grad students. We have the best.
Oh, we really do.
Well, so with all your writing and everything, where are the gaps? Where do you think there's more work needs to be done?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
Well, I mean, one major gap that we're trying to fill, even though, did you all meet on Tuesday?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, good. is in the study of queer theory. So, I mean, it's a relatively new field, and so Haley, AJ, one of my grad students, Maya, who probably shouldn't be doing it because she's other things she needs to be doing, and our friend Joseph my student, he's a friend, student Joseph, meet every Tuesday for 3 hours and do an independent study in the queer theory. I mean, I think that there are some sort of critical gaps like that. There's a lot of work to be done, and even what we're reading, some of it seems weird or dated, or it's like an ever-evolving
Extremely dated.
field. Yeah, weird stuff.
And a lot of queer scholarship tends to focus on like personal pedagogy in the classroom, like their personal experiences, like
It's very personal.
yeah, always very personal. There are not really many like larger studies about queer faculty. I mean, guess it's still going to be.
Well, I'm currently editing a collection called From the Outside, Narratives from the Other. What is it called? Oh my god. From the Outside, Narratives from the Other in the Academy. And I have two co-editors, Keith Dorwick, who's a professor of English, and Santosh Katka, who's a professor of rhetoric and composition at University of California, Northridge. And we sent out a call for papers, asking people to send us in. We wanted them to have personal narratives, but to theorize them about the experiences that they've had being othered in the academy. We got 47 abstracts, which is a lot, I thought, of just unbelievably heart-wrenching narratives. So I think a lot of it is talking about these things. There's a new blog. I don't know if it's new, but I think Inside Higher Ed just picked it up, called Conditionally Accepted, that sort of publishes these things. So I think that events like this is wonderful. Having an opportunity to speak these things out loud. I don't know about grad student experience. I had a hellish grad student experience, so y'all probably don't want to go to the tour.
There's not enough opportunities to come together. We tend to, the catchphrase will be silos. But there aren't enough opportunities for us to speak interdisciplinary in this way. And I'm going to give plugs here to the Center for Louisiana Studies because they're willing to take on the hard topics. I mean, gun violence. You all didn't shy away at all when we wanted to take this in a variety of different ways. And so, I mean, let's keep the Center for Louisiana Studies.
I was talking to one of my colleagues, Young Sing Woo, earlier. She called me on the phone, and she said that she felt that the students were getting more progressive, and I think it's like maybe we're getting older. I didn't say that, but there's like a learning curve. I'm not that old, but I could tell there's a gap between a 20-year-old and me. And so I taught Alison Bechdel's Fun Home and University 100. And my co-teacher was Fabrice Laura, and he was very nervous that they would, have a freak out because that happened at Duke, at several universities where the entire freshman cohort erupted in rage when Bechdel's Fun Home was selected as like the text in common, and our students loved it. So I'm finding that I sort of just go ahead and teach whatever I want to teach, and try to develop a critical, nurturing pedagogy that allows for kind of openness of dialogue. And I think, also, as you were saying earlier, it's Gilead, right? I think that, young students are excited when you give them, I just read an article actually the other day in the Chronicle or something. It was like, students want good books to read. They want to be challenged. And so, this semester I taught Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and The Tortilla Curtain. I don't know if you've read that, but that is hard to read. And my students I just finished reading all their papers about Coates, and all of them were like smart, and nobody, it's like clear to them. We talked about intersectionality, we talked about oppression. It's obvious. They live in the world too. And I also think that creating an opportunity for students to be really open about who they are. We were talking, it was like Super Tuesday 2 yesterday, which is silliness. And we went around the room, I tried to encourage civic participation. We talked about what it means to vote in a primary or a caucus, and my Republican students were quite anxious to see what was going to happen, if Trump was going to take it all, and my Democrat students were kind of disaffected, and it was really interesting to see that dialogue between them. There was no animosity. So, and I feel like I could be, I'm mixed race, I'm heavily tattooed, I'm young, I have a septum piercing, I'm strange. It could be an issue, and it's just not. So I think that students are, if you present them, with beautiful, interesting, engaging ideas who always rise to the occasion. I very rarely see students, and if they don't, it's because something's wrong, usually. Something's up. My students are always, I don't know, you guys are, good job.
And that was UNIV 100.
Yeah, well, no, the UNIV 100, we taught crazy things. It was like Franco-Belgian and American comics, but this is honor, like freshman 115.
Still freshman.
Yeah, and none of them are English majors, and they're whipping right through them. We read American Born Chinese, which is a comic book about it. Next we're going to read Faulkner, They'll Survive.
It's funny, because my students, when they read Faulkner, said on my teaching evaluations, they liked everything, and then one wrote, "Dang you, Faulkner." He's hard.
Yeah.
He's hard for me.
I'm a Faulkner fanatic. I have his face tattooed on my arm. My child is named August. They don't know about in my class. They love Faulkner. Or if they don't tell me. But it is difficult,
He's hard.
Allison, an excerpt from Bechdell's Fun Home is at the end of the new Bedford Anthology of American Literature.
Oh, that's exciting.
Volume 2, yeah.
I know that they've added some Mouse of Art Spiegelman to the Norton some years ago.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, I'm talking a lot, but to not be afraid to bring these issues up. Our students are queer, our students are minorities, our students are, I was told when I got down here that my students would be kind of, I don't know, I don't sometimes think Louisianans, just people from outside that kind of see themselves as they actually are. Just fairly progressive people, coming from where I came from before here, Iowa, not, maybe politically progressive, but not socially progressive, like this place is. So, this is a delightful, wonderful place to be. I think that we should, stop feeling like we're, like our students or our culture is backwards, because it's really not. I think I would know that. You would know that. Do you feel like this place is better than where you were?
West Virginia, yes. I'll say that immediately, yes. Oh my God. Well, they like to, talk shit on the South because they're like South Light.
I
know, right? They're like, oh, we separated from Virginia and blah, blah, blah. But they still have all those Confederate flags all on their trucks.
This school is a really, I think we should talk about great things, like it's the first school to desegregate, and we have it's got a really amazing legacy and a great culture. I don't know. I think it's one thing. I'm having fun. Oh, good. Yeah.
I like that, I'm a native of Lafayette, and so I love hearing that you guys think that we're not That's a very compliment to hear.
My husband and I moved to Opelousas, which is, really small.
Yeah.
We just wanted to live out in the kind of country. I don't know, we just want to live in a tiny town. Because Lafayette's a little...
But you could get even smaller than Opelousas.
Laplace. Laplace. Population 2.5. Highlight of the town, Waffle House and Walmart.
I don't know about
Opelousas is a
that.
good place. I would think that's a big community for you guys.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah.
We have the house where we live is like a field that abuts a horse farm at the end of our. So you can walk across the field and go pet horses in our neighborhood, and the school's a French immersion school. Like crazy things that if we'd stayed in Iowa, we would never experience, right? Like a little Mardi Gras thing, they chased a chicken around. Like a little preschool children chased a chicken. And even Opelousas, somebody warned me, well, it's really country out there, and I don't know what they're talking about. So this is I feel like this is a very progressive city. We have, a Cajun alderman neighbor with like a Virgin Mary statue as tall as me. And we get along wonderfully. I think that, my parents are coming this weekend. My father, when we moved to the Deep South, was very worried about driving to visit us. He was convinced that some police officer would like pull him over, like in the heat of the night type of deal or something. I don't know. But as they've been coming over the 5 years they've lived here, they've really seen that this is we feel comfortable here. It's a safe place. So.
Driving from Wichita?
No, they're flying. Yeah.
They can ride down on my
Yeah.
I was reminded again about terminology. Haley, as you self-referenced, butchness. I mean, do those terms come around again? And how do people know around you what is insulting and what is not, as the previous panel suggested?
Well, I don't know. It usually depends on, how it's used, I'd say, context, and who's saying it, right? Obviously, other queer folks end up being able to, I wouldn't say allowed to use those words, but are more sensitive to connotations and how those can be received, because I have no qualms about being called a dyke, and my friends, using dyke as a reference term. I've had gay male friends that didn't mind being called a faggot, and they were totally fine with this. But especially somebody from the straight community who is not really that sure, they're like, can I say that word? And I'm like, no. If you have to ask, no, not really. Yeah, kind of. It's really in terms of like respect. If they do respect me and they don't adopt that like patronizing tone, like they're infantilizing me a little bit, then I don't have to try and hit them. So it works out.
When I was 15 in New Orleans and on a bowling team, I was the only straight person on the team. And a dyke was a term that was okay then, and I don't know whether it made...
It's come around pretty much. A lot.
80s maybe?
Yeah, I'd say the 80s, yeah. Like, kind of use it to self-identify. I think it's more about, like, just the ability to reclaim those terms and take them back. Yeah, because,
Well, Alison Bechtel, before she's Alison Bechtel, had a strip for years that ran in underground lesbian magazines called Dykes to Watch Out For, which is an amazing title. So I would definitely say that, I got a student a great paper, but she kept switching back and forth between people of color and colored people. Well, I don't know, she's, I don't know, like everyone knows. So, I just made a little note, I think part of it for me, at least as a pedagogue, is I'm very slow to like get mad or upset anyway, but and sometimes it does suck and it is hard to be the one to always be put in the position to constantly be teaching people things. But I don't, at the end of the day, mind telling that student that actually people of color and colored people are not interchangeable. And now she knows, and we can move on with our lives. So.
I had that conversation with my mother.
Oh yeah.
Well, and we've started to see that kind of pop it up in pop culture too, like those instances where they act like, we don't, if you're outside of that community, you shouldn't use that word. I don't know if you saw Zootopia.
Yes.
Just recently came out. I'm actually really loving it. A lot of like intersections with class and race. But like the one character's a bunny and she wants to be a cop, and they're like, no prey, like a bunny can be a cop. And when she shows up on the first day, they're like, oh, how cute, a bunny. And she's like, well, it's okay when other bunnies call bunnies cute, but when another animal does it. And they're like, oh no, I'm so sorry. It's adorable.
It actually was a movie.
Yeah, I was like,
There's lots of opportunities.
I think it's also, sometimes with older people, like I worked with this guy named Larry, in college, he just, no matter how many times we told Larry, it's not colored people, Larry, like, he just couldn't quite get it, but he wasn't like,
He wasn't trying to be offensive.
no. And I think that there's a huge difference between trying to give offense and just being kind of clueless, and then also being kind of uninterested and not being clueless, which is, you know, and also I think there can be change fatigue, you know, people can feel change fatigue, right? Like when you're young and excited and you have all these ideas and you're, you know, things take time to change, and it's kind of, like, it's like weird to hear my like 36-year-old self say that, because, you know, 20, I'm gonna be like, things have to change now. But now I realize that it takes time and effort, and progress is slow, but like that King quote, like the arc of
The moral arc of the universe is long, but
been sort of justice, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the internet has helped with this too, because there's just so much information out there that
Also
they
make it
can
like
access.
weirder though.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. But I mean, that's essentially how I kind of figured out I was a lesbian. Like, I didn't have anybody in my community. My library had no books. And if they did, they were vandalized and then later removed. So, I mean, there was probably like maybe one token like book about gay men that might have been it. But that was, so the internet definitely, I'd say, helped in terms of like young queers who have no idea.
Youngin, I keep forgetting you're a youngin. That's true.
Yeah, I am. But yeah, no, I think that really helps with like young queers who are kind of figuring out their identity and trying to find information, and just people who want to be informed finding information, because I mean, you didn't really find that kind of stuff in the card catalog. Not very often.
Discreet, you know, Google what is a lesbian, you know.
Hunched over my like school computer, trying to like not let the other kids see me. Like, oh no, they might think I'm a lesbian. Well, like, unfortunately, I was the last one to realize it, so they all knew. Oh, so obvious, like painful.
I had my son's daycare director once told me that she knows even when at 2 years of age, she says she can identify who's straight and who's not. You know, and I thought that was very interesting because, you know, over the years I've heard several of my friends talk about when they realized that they weren't straight, you know, and how, you know, to varying degrees of, you know, self-acceptance and understanding from their family. But I thought it was really interesting that somebody could externally identify people.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of trans friends, and one of my friends in grad school, her daughter is 5, but already knows that she's a girl, right? Even though she's assigned to male at birth. And so I think that things are progressing. She's fine with it. Like, she's got like the safe book and stuff, but her daycare and preschool are okay with it, and you know, there are places she probably wouldn't move. There are places I probably wouldn't move. So.
And going back to terminology, within our lesbian community, terminology is used very, very freely. I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but a few months ago, Haley was like, well, AJ, you're not really femme, you're not really butch, you're more of a chapstick lesbian.
Stand by that.
Yes.
AJ, are things better with your parents?
Yes, absolutely. I've had partners since then who have been, you know, very, very just wonderful partners, and my parents have been accepting. They've been invited over for Christmas dinner, for the unwrapping of gifts, which is funny, right? Because I came out on Christmas Day. And my parents have even bought them gifts, invited them out to dinner, and yeah, they're really great. They're making an effort. They don't completely understand it, but it's gotten better since I wrote this piece, definitely.
They helped you move in with Sam, right? They helped you guys move into your
Yes,
apartment?
yes, that's true. My current fiance, my parents helped us move into our apartment, came all the way from Waffle House lip gloss. Did that, so it's good. Definitely better.
Are you an only child?
No, I'm the younger of two girls.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you have any support from your sister?
Yes, absolutely. My sister's been my saving grace. When my parents were kind of on the fence about my homosexuality, oh, no, she really went to bat for me. She tried to push them to invite my partners to things, to functions, and to invite them over. And eventually they started doing that, and I think they're okay with it now. So my family is very, it's always been a very tight-knit, cohesive unit, and I think that my sister has facilitated that a lot, their acceptance.
I'm familiar with, how Catholicism handles these issues, but what about the Hindu religion? How is it viewed or?
Well, that article that, remember I posted?
Yeah, I read it.
It's
on here.
Oh, it's on. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It might take a minute, so.
Okay. Well, I think in the past there's been some mention of homosexuality, like in the Kama Sutra, in a lot of ancient Sanskrit literature. As far as in India itself, in modern times, there has been a lot of rape and violence of women who have come out as lesbians as of late. A few years ago, I remember hearing stories about that. It's getting better. It's getting better in India. A lot of people in India, mainstream society, seem to think that we need to blame Western culture for the onset of homosexuality in India. Whereas, now it's gotten a little bit better and there's more understanding there, I think. I would like to think,
We taught it.
Yes.
We just chat too much in this group.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
We have a group on Facebook, all of us, and more chatting than I've ever done in my life.
Stickers, yeah.
Yes.
Usage.
Is that it? Okay. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you especially for sharing such personal stories. I feel honored, and I know everybody here does, for having learned that much deeply about you, just meeting you. And I hope that we can continue these conversations here on campus at the Center for Louisiana Studies. We really do want to talk about these hard topics. We want to push the envelope. We want to have conversations, have dialogue, and hopefully have positive change come out of these conversations. So if you have an idea for a topic, we also, in the process of over the last year or so, looking at our collections, have really recognized the gaps in our collection. And a lot of what we talked about today are serious gaps in our collection. And we would like to round that out, and we invite you all to help us with that. If you have stories that you would like to have preserved in our archives, if you know of people who have stories that need to be shared and preserved for the future, please let us know. We would like to help you out with that. And don't leave, or leave and go get a quick dinner, an early dinner, and come right back, because we have a book launch at 6 o'clock, and we have the two co-editors here and several of the contributing authors for both Volume 2, and some also from Volume 1 as well. So thank you again for coming out. If you have any questions or you need further information about the center, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm Jennifer Ritter-Guidry, and thanks again.